Now that we understand the various emitter settings, let's put that into practice and create a fire effect. Now for our fire effect, we're going to use two different emitters. We're going to use one for the flames, and we're going to use one for the smoke. So let's start with the one for the actual flames. We create this emitter that's got a velocity pointing upwards, and we're going to color it so that it's orange, and we're going to paint it with this fire material. Now this fire material uses a flame texture, and it's going to use an additive blend so the fire will look bright. We're going to set the emitter radius so that the flames start out with a 0.5 radius, and then they'll finish out with a 0.25 radius, so they'll get a little bit smaller as they progress. And then we'll give it a little bit of a waver so the flames aren't going straight up. We'll give it a small rotation speed, and we'll set the emitter area so that the fire isn't all emitting from one spot. And then up here with the smoke emitter, you'll notice we've got 8,000 for the lifetime, so this will last quite a bit longer. And because the particles are going to be spread over a longer area, we need more of them, so we're going to use 400 for the intensity, and that will give it 400 particles. And these particles are going to move upwards too, but they're not going to be going up as fast as the fire particles. The velocity here is 0.10, and the fire velocity is going to be 0.20, so the smoke will be half as fast. We're going to paint the smoke emitter with the smoke material, and we're going to color it so that it's a little bit darker, and we're going to use 0.25 for the alpha value. We'll set the emitter radius so that they start out at 0.25 and finish within a radius of 1. So the smoke particles are actually going to grow. You'll remember before we said the fire particles are going to shrink, but it will look good that way. We'll add an emitter waver value so the smoke particles aren't all going up in one straight stream. And we'll be sure to set the rotation speed for these because they're going to be pretty big particles, so the rotation will make it look a lot better. And then we'll set the emitter area for the smoke particles. So I only spent a few minutes on this effect, but you can see just by adjusting these basic settings we get an effect that looks pretty good. Now I want to show you a problem that will occur if we render particles with lighting without doing anything special. In this program I'm creating a render buffer, and then I'm loading a scene mesh so that we have some kind of a background, and I'm creating a single point light, and then I'm just going to render lights like I would normally. So you can see the smoke particles don't look right, and if you'll recall, a deferred renderer renders everything in the scene, and then it renders lighting on top of those results. Now if we have an alpha blended material like this smoke emitter, then the renderer doesn't really know how to handle that very well. So we're going to handle this a little bit differently. Now the proper way to render alpha transparency in a deferred renderer is to render your main objects first and then render your alpha blended objects in a second pass. So before I create these particle emitters, I'm going to create another world, and I'm going to call that the foreground. And of course I have to have a camera in that world to render it, so I'm going to create another camera, and I'll call that FGCam. And I want to set the camera clear mode to 0 because I'm going to be rendering this world on top of the results of the main world. So then I create my particle emitters, and then I'll set the world back to the main world. And down here I'm going to set the buffer to the G buffer and render the world. and then set the buffer to the back buffer and render lighting. Then I'll set the world to the foreground world, which is where the emitters are, and I'm going to copy the entity matrix from the main camera to the foreground camera, and then I'm going to update the world, and since the current world here is the foreground world, this will update the foreground world, and that's where the particle emitters get updated, by the way, so it's very important that you call that. And then I call render world, and then I set the world back to the main world. And you can go through the article for this lesson, and all the code is there. I'm just going through this pretty quickly. So let's run this program. And now you can see our fire effect is working properly with no visual artifacts. The flame is brighter and the smoke emitter isn't interfering with the background.